I'm Dana Moriello, and you're listening to This Is a Thing, the podcast where I interview entrepreneurs who started unusual businesses about how they made their wild ideas happen. Today, we're talking to Marc Evans, co-founder of Maniac Pumpkin Carvers. Here's the wild idea: elevating pumpkin carving into a fine art. I wanted to talk to Marc because I had seen incredibly gorgeously carved artistic pumpkins at the New York Botanical Gardens, and I was intrigued to hear the stories behind these pumpkins and others like them. In particular, I love exploring this intersection between art and entrepreneurship, and wanted to know how one of the most accomplished carvers in the business sees his identity and balances how he spends his time. Stay tuned to hear how a call from Wired magazine asking Marc and his partner Chris to carve a Star Wars pumpkin changed the course of their career. About how sometimes starting a great business is about pursuing your passion in a fun project and seeing where it goes, and what it actually takes to create an entire industry from the inside. Enjoy the conversation. I want to start with the first pumpkin. You are a lifelong artist. That does not even seem like it was a conscious decision for you, so much as an identity from day one. After graduating art school at Parsons, you and your good friend, now business partner Chris, you're working at bars in New York City. You carve your first pumpkin as a decoration for the bar. Of course, it's amazing because you are an artist. What I don't know is, were you paid or commissioned for that first pumpkin, or was it truly just a labor of love?
Me and Chris have been making art together since we were 12 years old. Middle school art class, and then high school and college. When we were both in college and then after, we were working in bars and restaurants, some iconic spots in the East Village. And we always were doing different things to express our creativity. In the service industry, there's downtime early in the shift. And so the first few pumpkins started as a way of procrastination. Let's kill some time and do something fun and make decorations for the places that we worked at.
Yeah.
And so the first couple were, Halloween's coming, let's make some decorations for these establishments that we work at, and it'll be fun. People will get a kick out of it. And then people's reactions were great, so we did more.
Were you surprised by what you were hearing?
Pumpkin carving, especially then, now the reactions to pumpkin carving is still unbelievable. But back then there was much less exposure to different things being done with that as an art medium. And so the first few pumpkins were really just like, what can I do that is going to take this from the classic jack-o'-lanterns I've been doing since I was a kid and use some of the art skills that I've been developing and kick it up a notch? And then how far can we actually push this? And so the first year or two of us experimenting with pumpkin carving, they were really elevated jack-o'-lanterns. And then we started thinking we can push this a lot further, apply some of our illustration skills, some printmaking techniques, some sculptural techniques, and see how far, how much detail. And so I would say around 2003 is when we were first like, it would be fun to decorate the bars and cafes that we're working at with some pumpkins. And then by 2006, we had started to develop the beginnings of the style that we've become really known for, of really approaching it like an illustrator. That's when we started posting a lot of our work on Flickr. And Flickr was a site where professional photographers and amateur, anybody could share their photos, and you could get comments. You would meet people through Flickr. But it was much more about the photography than the interactions.
I think that's a really interesting turning point when you start sharing your work publicly. But there's one thing to make one pumpkin. There's another thing to stay with it for years before you're sharing it and making it a business. So I want to know more about why you stuck with it. At what point did it transition from, this is a really interesting artistic pursuit, to, hey, there's someone who's going to pay us for this to support this as kind of part of our portfolio of work?
I don't think that connection really was made until after the attention ramped up via some publicity.
Okay. So up until the Flickr post, this was something that you were self-funding as art you wanted to put out into the world.
For the first few years, it was like, let's carve a few pumpkins for the places we're working at. We were throwing Halloween parties and we would do decorations for our parties. Then we started doing some as gifts for people we'd done artwork for, gifts for friends who had bars or worked at a hotel. We started thinking, could we sell some of these? The seeds started getting planted based on the reactions we were getting,
Aha.
but the scale was off. We were like, all right, we know a lot of bar and restaurant owners. We know people that work in some of the big hotels. What if we got some placements and did like a pumpkin for a hotel lobby or for some store windows? The first few years, we were selling some pumpkins. They were very difficult to sell. There wasn't a demand for it. There was not this idea that pumpkins are art. People still were thinking of pumpkins as something that you did with your kids or as a kid, and not something that they would purchase for a lot of money. Early on, we were getting maybe 10, 12 orders, and that seemed like a lot. In the first few years, when we got up to like 30 pumpkins, that was like, wow, this might have some potential, but we were having trouble selling them for like $50 each, $75 each.
And were you advertising at this point, or this kind of random inbound demand that you were getting?
Honestly, we've never advertised.
So-
It's always been word of mouth or kind of like guerrilla marketing tactics.
Yeah.
We've put money into promotional materials. We've put money into merchandise and stickers. But really, those first early years, a lot of it was us just like trying to get placements in different places and generate word of mouth and get press.
So that was a really big turning point for you. Up to that point, pumpkins are a piece of the portfolio of the things you're doing. You're still working at bars, you're doing other sorts of art. What does that portfolio look like, and how big a piece are pumpkins before that Flickr point?
Okay, so pumpkins were minuscule. It was just a goof. It wasn't something that we really thought of as a business at that point. We didn't have a website yet. We were working out of our apartment. It wasn't until the first round of real exposure that we realized the potential. And it happened kind of quickly, where we were posting work on Flickr. I was posting photos of all different types of art, all different types of nature photography, concert photography, the works.
So help us understand that context. What are the other things on your plate in addition to pumpkin? You mentioned it's the minuscule parts. So what's that other majority for you at that point?
I was doing a lot of illustration work. I was doing murals, which I still do. I was doing some concert photography.
Wow.
I had toes in a lot of different pools.
Okay.
And I didn't expect pumpkins to be the one to take off.
Interesting. Was there one that you wanted to take off? Were you betting on one of the horses?
I don't know that I had that clear of a vision for where things were heading. As long as I was making art, I was happy. And some years, I honestly back then was making less art than others. But, I was always making art and using creativity. And same thing for my partner, Chris. He's a brilliant artist, and we heavily would feed off each other's energy. If he would do something creative, he would immediately want me to see it, and I would be blown away and then have to step up my game. That healthy competition really pushed us to always keep producing at our highest levels.
Yeah.
That kind of feedback was always very helpful in our trajectories.
Your identity is as an artist. Getting paid
Sure.
to do art with whatever medium is resonating with you and with the public is exciting. You put on Flickr all of that, right? It wasn't just pumpkins. It was a full portfolio. And who would have guessed that pumpkins are the thing that got the reaction?
When we started posting the pumpkins to Flickr, it wasn't even like that was becoming the primary focus of our Flickr. It was just one of the many things we were sharing. And we got a hit from Wired magazine, and they said that they were doing a feature on nerdy Star Wars pumpkins and reaching out to a few different artists, and they wanted to know if we had ever done any Star Wars pumpkins. We are big Star Wars fans, big Star Wars nerds. And at that point, we didn't have any Star Wars pumpkins carved. Luckily, it was the right time of year because pumpkins are seasonal. It was in October. And I said, I will get back to you tomorrow. So I did a Star Wars pumpkin that night, sent some photos. It became part of their post, which went viral on Flickr. It received enough traction that the following year, I reached back out to the editor and explained that we had been leveling up our game and had produced a ton more pumpkins that year. And I said, would you guys be interested in doing an article, like a feature just with us?
Nice.
We pitched it to them. They were on board. And that article they did online got a ton of shares and brought us a lot of press early on and got us the attention of the New York Yankees, Martha Stewart, Food Network. And so that's when it started to explode.
So of those pieces of the story, when you get that first outreach from Wired and then that article, are you surprised by this reaction? What are you feeling at that time?
It was surprising, but also a moment that we were hoping for and ready for. We are artists. I wish I had taken some business classes. That's not the angle that we had come from. So we had to learn through trial and error and being ready to take advantage of opportunities as they happen and being in the right place in the right time.
What were you doing to be ready for that opportunity when it came from Wired? What was in place?
The first contact with Wired, being able to drop what I was doing and carve a Star Wars pumpkin that night and produce what they needed to make an opportunity happen. And then the following year, being able to have the confidence to say, listen, we have a portfolio now and you guys should do a feature on us. After that first hit with Wired, that's when we really start thinking, all right, we should have a website. And so we started Maniac Pumpkin Carvers then.
It sounds like there's an element of your story that's, hey, we're going to go with the flow. We're going to be opportunistic. If people like something, we'll start to go in that direction. Is there a turning point when you say, now we're going to deliberately plan for a path?
Forming the website was the first step towards realizing that maybe there's a viable business that could be a part of our repertoire of what we do.
Interesting. What made you confident that at that moment, all of a sudden, oh, wow, this could be the case? You're getting those commissions from the Wired article?
Once we had the website, we started getting more hits and more requests and more commissions. But the website back then was very much like an artist portfolio, more so than catering to the types of clients and businesses that we really wanted to work with.
What are the type of businesses and clients that you wanted to work with? You had a vision of your ideal client at that point?
Not yet at that point. When we first started the website, we still didn't have the full vision of how big this could grow. We were thinking of it like artists. We were thrilled that people were seeing our work. We were stoked if we made a few $100, but we were having trouble selling a pumpkin for $100. You had to convince someone that spending $100 on something perishable was worthwhile. Then we started shifting our mindset, and it went hand in hand with some of the bigger press hits that we started getting Martha Stewart, getting Food Network, getting the New York Yankees. When the Yankees reached out to us in 2009, we got a call from the executive who's in charge of catering, and he wanted pumpkins for each of the 50 skyboxes. At that point, we had probably carved 30-something pumpkins at most in a season. We basically had like 48 hours. They were like, game one is in 2.5 days, and we want 50 pumpkins. And we said, okay, we'll figure it out.
Marc, a theme I'm noticing is you're very good at saying yes and then figuring it out.
Yeah, that's part of how we have been able to succeed and grow, and being ready to jump on the opportunity and being creative in how we approach these problems. And flexibility is a big part of it, but it was a major shift for us having to wrap our heads around how do we do 50 pumpkins in this very short amount of time. Luckily, it was all the same design, aside from there were 2 extras that we did that were portraits, but for the most part, it was like the World Series logo. So we kind of were able to assembly line it, and we called up everybody we knew, and we were like, we're having a pumpkin scooping party. Come help scoop pumpkins. And there were 3 of us that did all the carving, but we had a team of people showing up, bringing food, bringing drinks, scooping pumpkins, roasting seeds, and we had a blast, and it was a party.
That sounds magical. That also seems like a great example of being ready for opportunities when opportunities come. you had such a strong community of people who were supporting you, of fellow artists that you could call upon when you got
Yeah.
that commission.
Yeah, totally. It was a mix of people from all of our different circles who were having a blast helping out. And that was the turning point for us in seeing the scale that could be achieved. That if one client wants 50 pumpkins, we thought there's other clients who will want larger orders and larger installations. That's when the wheels started really spinning of like, all right, how do we get the clients that we want? Then we started shifting our mindset about things, and Food Network happened around that time also.
I don't want to gloss over that milestone in the journey and what that might have meant for your trajectory. So you get a call from the Food Network saying, hey, out of the blue, want to be on a show?
Food Network called and wanted to cast both me and Chris for the first season of Halloween Wars.
Okay.
That show has become a huge show for Food Network. Back then it was an unknown, but we thought it sounded like an incredible opportunity. We started through that first season of Halloween Wars finding a community of other artists that worked with edible, ephemeral, perishable mediums. And that was kind of a big deal too, just to know that there were others that could relate and that we could learn with, grow with, collaborate with.
I want to double down on what you just said about building community in this new place, because I think that's such an interesting insight that you had. Was there a point where your identity is starting to change? How do you start to see yourself at this point, if it's at all different from how you were seeing yourself previously?
We started leaning into the fact that we were now professional pumpkin carvers.
Okay.
We started using aliases, Marc Maniac, Chris Maniac. At that point, we knew we were onto something with this pumpkin thing. We had enough clients that it wasn't our primary source of income, but it was becoming more sustainable. And we were making enough back then that our short season in October, which now our season is much longer than that. Back then it was a couple weeks in October, paid a few months of rent for us. And it was like, all right, this is something. Most of the people that we were competing against on those shows, they were also professional pumpkin carvers, but nobody really had figured out a business model for it yet. And it felt like we were the first ones that kind of figured out a way to sell our work. People who were getting press and publicity and doing really cool things, they weren't getting hired to do it. It was like we were selling to bars, restaurants, stores. We had pumpkins in designer clothing shops in Soho. We were starting to do some events, and we were trying to think about different ways to expand the business.
So you said that pumpkins are becoming a larger part of your portfolio, but it still wasn't your primary source of income. What does your full portfolio look like at this point, for context?
Selling commissions of artwork, creating illustrations and selling usage rights, doing murals, heavily subsidizing our artwork with working in bars and restaurants. We were artists living in Brooklyn doing the artist life, whatever you had to do to get the job done. But pumpkins was becoming a bigger and bigger thing. Being able to pay some bills off and pay a couple months rent was huge.
At what point do you start thinking, I am Marc, the professional pumpkin carver? I am Marc, a professional pumpkin carver, and I own a pumpkin carving business. At what point does that become a mantle you take on?
I feel like that full shift probably happens later. When we decided to revamp the website, kind of around when the second season of Halloween Wars was coming out, we elevated it. And that's when we started thinking of it as a business and that we needed a website that catered to professional clients. We weren't trying to impress other artists anymore. We weren't trying to impress other carvers anymore. I mean, we still are, but the website wasn't. We took the website from being an artist portfolio style of site, like all the cool images of what we've done, to being a marketing tool of, these are services. We do live events. We can create installations of 100 pumpkins people will want to use as a photo op. We can do advertising. We kept trying to stay ahead of the curve and offer new services and new applications where our pumpkins could be of value to someone. And we also changed our mindset around that same time For a long time, we were having trouble getting people to justify spending $100 on a pumpkin. And then we started raising the prices. And we acknowledged that this is a luxury item. I think we started selling them for a few $100s and started getting less rejection. And the right clients started saying yes. I think it was when we sold our first $500 pumpkin. And once we hit that barrier, that kind of just blew our minds. And we were like, all right, that's substantial. And if they're willing to spend 500 on something that is perishable, they'll also be willing to spend 7, 8, 9. Knowing that there were people willing to spend the money allowed us to really level up the work and spend the time that we wanted to spend on these works. It wasn't that we were also just raising the prices without reason. We were putting in more time, more detail, creating better products every season. And we wanted to know that we could charge a rate that really was justifiable for the work that we were creating.
As you're refining that business model and the pricing, is there a point where pumpkins become all of your portfolio, or is it always, even to this day, part of a mix of things?
Even to this day, it is very seasonal for us. We work on pumpkin-related business things throughout the year. There's always meetings and designs and behind-the-scenes stuff that happens. But because of the seasonality of it, and just because of the nature of us as the type of artists that we are, we like doing a range of things. Yeah. And so we both, outside of pumpkin season, still produce fine art in our studios. We still do a lot of murals. And we also both will take on different types of illustration and other gigs too, as they become the right fit. But one thing that was amazing was as pumpkin carving became a bigger piece of our pie, it allowed us more flexibility in choosing the types of other projects that we wanted to take on.
At what point did working at the bars fall off the portfolio and you were full-time on art pursuits?
I kept a foot in the door for a long time. And part of that was a big part of my world. The people that I worked with in many of those bars, it was my family. I tried to keep a shift or two just to have a foot into that world. It was always nice having some extra cash coming in. I cut back to one shift a week for a bunch of years. And then around when the pandemic started is when I fully kind of stepped out and didn't go back. The places that I worked at were fun and we would work hard, but I always felt like I was getting paid to hang out with my friends. That was my night out and I was making money doing it. So it was tough to fully give that up for a long time.
I have a template in my head of a dramatic quit your day job moment. And I like the antithesis that you just described of, you know, it's more organic and it's fun and it's not that dramatic.
There was a bigger shift at some point in that trajectory where my bar owner, one of my best friends, he agreed with me and said, maybe it's time for you to cut back and really focus on what's important to you. Because that lifestyle is not conducive to waking up in the morning and having meetings. It can definitely be draining. You're working long hours and late hours. So when I cut down to keeping one night a week, and sometimes I wouldn't even do that, I would get those shifts covered, it really opened a lot of doors for me to focus and invest much more into my art, which is my passion.
So if I could go back and tell that kid working in the bar full time, making a pumpkin on the side, that this is what your life would be like today, what are the things that you would say, you're crazy? That can't be. What surprises you the most?
I always had a vision for big things, and it's a little bit of a surprise that pumpkin carving blew up the way it did, but it doesn't totally shock me. It just kind of fits. We always loved Halloween. We always loved making art, and the intersection of those things, it happened very organically, but once it happened, it felt very natural. Yeah, it fit. It's one of those things that we were in the right place at the right time. For many years, part of what we were doing through our work, through our guerrilla kind of marketing tactics, through all of the press opportunities that we got, was educating people and educating potential clients that this is a thing. We were very calculated about how we talked to the media because it was so weird. We would get a lot of press requests across all forms of media. We were always very calculated about how we phrased things regarding our work and really trying to plant the seeds in the public that pumpkin carving is worth spending money on, that it's something that is a luxury decor item that will enhance your events.
You didn't just grow the business, you grew the industry. You were playing the long game of making this industry established.
It was definitely something that we put a lot of thought into and discussed often. How can we make this grow? We weren't the only ones doing it. Others were also helping this to grow, but it was a planned, coordinated effort on our part that went hand in hand with the explosion of Halloween. There was a feedback loop of us being in the right place and time and ready to capitalize, and then Halloween becoming the seasonal commercial holiday second only to Christmas. So we kept pushing this idea that pumpkins are something that everyone should try and do at home because it's fun and nostalgic. But if you want a professional to do it, this is a service that we provide and we're going to blow your minds. And we always kept that approach of we want everyone to experience this, but if you want something awesome, come to the pros.
Let's end on this note. What are you most excited about that's coming up in the future for you?
We've always been good at figuring out ways of pivoting and expanding based on the needs. When COVID happened, we started offering online classes, which became a huge hit for us. We made a ton of sales during COVID because we were doing corporate workshops for thousands of employees. All the big companies would reach out to us and be like, is there anything you can do online? And we were like, yes, we have an online program. And then we would send carving kits to every participant. We were doing unbelievable numbers in those years. And it's always being ready to jump on the next trend before it starts and trying to have the foresight to plan ahead. Right now, we have a couple ideas in development of products we want to release and services that nobody else is doing. It's always trying to find that sweet spot of things that are fun for us and use a variety of our skills and things that fill a demand that we don't think is being filled.
That was Marc Evans talking about his journey building Maniac Pumpkin Carvers. Here are my three favorite takeaways from that episode and why they stood out to me. First, be ready to take advantage of opportunities when they come, and you never know when that will be. Marc created a flexible schedule so he could adjust and spend time where needed when he got a great opportunity. He was always leveling up his skills. He also built a wonderful, tight-knit community of artists around him that could offer support when needed. All of that meant that when he got that fateful call from Wire that changed the course of his career asking for that Star Wars pumpkin, he could say yes and be ready. 2, sometimes you should just do the fun stuff just because. Marc didn't get into pumpkin carving because he had a grand vision that this would be a big business. He got into it because he thought it was fun. He was an artist and he loved Halloween, so what would be more fun than carving pumpkins with your friend? It became a great business, but it started as a fun project, and sometimes the best businesses do. 3rd, and finally, sometimes you need to change an entire industry for your business to take off. When Marc and Chris first got started, pumpkin carving was not an evolved industry yet. There weren't many people applying fine art skills to pumpkins and selling them for premium price points. They quickly realized that not only did they need to produce their own products and tell their own story, but at every opportunity they got, whenever they were doing press, they needed to help elevate the entire industry around them. They were playing the long game to create more demand for these pumpkins and more acceptance of the premium price point that this type of art is worth. This is Dana Moriello, and I can't wait to see you next week on This Is a Thing.